This podcast episode is sponsored by Geekdom, San Antonio's entrepreneurship hotspot and co-working space. Whether you need one-time recurring office space or event space, Geekdom has it all. Use code SOCIALBUTTERFLY when signing up for a membership to receive $25 off of monthly memberships. Welcome back to Unapologetically Visible, the podcast for high-achieving Latina and women of color founders who are done being the best-kept secret. I'm your host, Christina Olivarez, award-winning visibility and leadership coach, TEDx speaker, and founder and CEO of the Social Butterfly Gal and Hustle and Socialize. All right, I want to talk about visibility in a way that I think this conversation is long overdue because of all of the nuances that actually come about when I dive deep with other entrepreneurs and women that I coach around visibility and their leadership. Because if I'm being honest, most of the conversations that are happening around visibility right now, whether it is in closed circles or in the online sphere, are really far too narrow for the level of leader that I know is listening to the podcast and that follows my work. These conversations tend to reduce visibility down to content, like content strategy, posting frequency, platform growth, personal brand aesthetics, whether you're showing your face enough, whether you're consistent enough, whether you're using the right hook, whether you're posting video, whether you're visible enough online and in person through proximity. And while social media and online and offline visibility absolutely matters and content absolutely plays a role, I think we have made the mistake of treating the channels and these platforms as the whole visibility and leadership conversation, because it is not. Okay, social media is one channel through which visibility gets expressed. I want to repeat that loud and clear. Social media is just one channel through which your visibility gets to be expressed. It is not the totality of visibility. It's not even the deepest part of visibility. And for many Latina founders and women of color leaders, the real tension has very little to do whether you know how to post and show up on social media, but more on whether you are truly willing to be seen in your leadership without softening yourself to protect other people's comfort. That is a whole different conversation. I know women who are listening to me right now who are accomplished, intelligent, respected. You are far more capable than the way that you are currently being perceived on social media. And I know that there are women out there who are listening, who are posting, speaking, showing up, serving your clients, carrying your teams, leading communities, making real decisions, and still feeling the friction of being under-recognized, misunderstood, over-edited, and strangely disconnected from the version of visibility they thought would feel more powerful by now. And I want to talk about visibility as leadership, because visibility is definitely a huge part of your decision-making processes. That is where you find self-trust in your own visibility. And we all know that our visibility can be an emotional risk. And especially when it comes to the cultural tensions that we're seeing right now play out in our society. Our visibility as a willingness to let your full authority be seen before anyone has to agree with it can be daunting. I think too many women have been given advice about visibility that only works if the issue is tactical. And a lot of the women that I coach are not dealing with tactical issues. They are dealing with a deeper fracture between who they have become as a founder, a CEO, and a leader, and what they still feel safe expressing publicly. That fracture has consequences. It affects how you speak, and it affects what you reveal and what you conceal. It affects what you charge, how you sell it, how long your sales cycle becomes, how much energy it takes to be perceived, how often you second guess yourself, especially after telling your truth. and whether the people in your audience are encountering the actual depth of your leadership or just the more polished, curated, AI generated bullshit that we have come to recognize. I want to say this plainly at the beginning of this episode that if your visibility feels heavier or just more emotionally complicated, that doesn't automatically mean that you are doing it all wrong. It may mean that you understand what is at stake. And for women like us, being seen has never been neutral. For Latina founders, for women of color leaders who are culturally aware and politically aware, we are used to moving through spaces where perception is just never perception. Our visibility always had a charge to it. We know what it means to be overlooked and be underestimated. We know what it means to read through a lens before we ever heard on our own terms. And we know what it means to temper ourselves in order to remain palatable for people who are more comfortable with our labor than our power. So when someone says, just need to be more visible, I believe that that advice can be profoundly incomplete because it often ignores the social, emotional, and professional costs many women have already paid for being seen in the wrong room and in the wrong tone, or by people who did not know how to hold space for them properly. This is why I reject shallow visibility coaching and conversations, because visibility is not just an amplification through a social media channel. It's about what happens when you are amplified and whether your nervous system trusts the level of exposure your ambition really wants. It is whether you know how to hold yourself when visibility produces projection, envy, misunderstanding, or disagreement. And whether you can tell the truth immediately without rushing to over-explain yourself. That is what I believe visibility work does through the lens of leadership. I think one of the biggest mistakes women make at this stage of their business is assuming that the answer to visibility is just more content, when the real issue is that the content is still being filtered through self-protection. There are many layers of conditioning and sophistication and responsibility and lived experience, to that matter, that have taught my clients in particular exactly what can happen when a woman becomes too direct. So let's talk about this. There are 3 reasons I believe unapologetic visibility is not just helpful for Latina founders or women of color leaders, but it is necessary. The first is that a lot of brilliant women are still afraid of being assertive in public. I don't mean being assertive in a very cartoonish or performative way. I mean grounded certainty with full firmness in your convictions, the ability to speak in complete ownership of what you know, what you see, what you stand for in particular. That's an important one. And what you will no longer negotiate just to remain easily received. Many women that I coach have no problem being decisive privately. They are incredibly clear in their thinking and in their standards, what they would advise someone else to do. But in the moment that clarity has to become public, that is when you start seeing them hold back from all of that. They start self-editing. Many of my clients come to me in coaching sessions when we talk about public assertion, and immediately they really see it as a deeper risk. They start thinking, will I be seen as difficult or bitchy? Will people think I'm arrogant? Will people still trust me if I stop allowing them to curtsy my boundaries? Will I still be likable and markable? And I always challenge my clients around this notion. If your leadership is still being filtered through the question of how do I remain acceptable while saying XYZ, then what the market is encountering is not your full force of your leadership. That negotiation version still might sound smart, but it's not going to get the level of engagement and this command the same level of trust and authority or decision making that people can feel when someone is holding back from what they actually want to say. This is part of why some women look visible but do not feel fully recognized. And to be honest, there comes a point in your leadership where the cost of self-protection becomes more expensive than the risk of being assertive. I think a lot of women are tired in a way that has nothing to do with the laziness and everything to do with dissonance. They have built businesses and made money and carried responsibility, but many of them are reaching a point where they no longer are willing to keep building from the chronic override. And the business world does not always know what to do with the woman who wants power without self-betrayal. It's still very common to see business advice and coaching rooted in urgency and emotional suppression, very hyper performance and hyper vigilant. And a lot of women that I've coached have always followed these models, and they're recognizing that those models are no longer working for the level of leadership that they want to have now, both professionally and personally. Many of those same women now find themselves quietly asking a harder question. What if I no longer want to be successful in a way that requires me to abandon myself just to maintain it? That question changes everything. Because when a woman is exhausted by the identity she has had in order to sustain her business and her visibility, that's when it starts to feel like another demand. There's another layer to this that I want to bring in because it came up in a conversation recently with one of my clients, and I haven't stopped thinking about it. One of my clients said to me, right now, my goal is to reinvent myself professionally. I have gone through a lot of different scenarios recently. And as I move through this transition, I'm really focusing on my personal happiness in my work environment. And one of the truths that I keep coming back to is that I'm an introvert. I actually want to honor that. I don't want to build a version of success that pulls me out of it. Whew, that hit me like a ton of bricks and also made me excited for our VIP coaching session that we were going to have. And I want you to sit with that for a second. This is a woman that I'm coaching who is already really well established. She is definitely somebody who is becoming more honest about the conditions in which she is willing to lead. And what's important here is how quickly the conversation around visibility would misinterpret her. Most traditional visibility advice would hear that and immediately translate it to, okay, that's great, amazing, but you need to get comfortable with being more visible. And this is where I disagree. And this was why as a coach and as her coach, this is where unapologetic visibility reason 2 comes into play, because it's not every desire to be less exposed out of avoidance, but a lot of the times it comes to the discernment that we have in our visibility. Sometimes it is a woman recognizing that the way visibility has been modeled for her throughout the years of her career and in her business, it's starting to become incompatible with how she wants to live now, how she wants to lead, and how she wants to build. Instead of asking, how do I become more visible in the way that the industry expects, she is asking a more sophisticated question. How do I create a version of visibility that is congruent with who I am now? And that is such a great leadership question. If you are wired for depth, you will not thrive in performative, constant, high output visibility models that reward volume over substance. You will feel constantly drained and disconnected. And you will start to resent showing up. And then you will make it mean something about your discipline or your consistency. And I want to challenge you right here and now, especially if you resonate with this. I want to challenge you to start thinking about your own visibility, because you do not need to become more extroverted in order to be powerful in your visibility. When you remove volume as your primary strategy, what replaces it is clarity, especially when it comes to the depth of the clarity. You don't need to be everywhere on every single platform or every single networking event or anything that you think resembles visibility. Sometimes your visibility needs to be built on calibrated expression. It means your leadership is not loud just for the sake of being loud. It is clear enough that it doesn't need to be repeated in 10 different ways just to be understood. This is what I like to call visibility as alignment, where the question is no longer, how do I keep up with everything and what everyone else is doing, but what kind of visibility allows me to sustain my leadership, my energy, and my life without having to abandon myself just to maintain it? That is such a more honest question and the one that changes everything. The third reason unapologetic visibility is necessary is because so many women are still deeply afraid of vulnerability, especially when it comes to their leadership. This is a very real difference between emotional honesty and emotional leakage. There is a difference between leadership that includes the truth of your humanity and visibility that makes your audience responsible for holding what you have not yet. Sometimes your vulnerability becomes armor. I have seen many women that I coach articulate insight beautifully, but struggle to let themselves be personally known in a way that builds the trust deeper. Many women protect themselves, especially with their visibility and their vulnerability. They want to stay polished as possible and professional as they can. They really want to stay as intelligent and not let their vulnerability shine for fear that it's going to repel people and not make people want to work with them. I'm not saying that you need to become more exposed for the sake of appearing relatable, but what I am going to say is that there is a level of leadership where people need to feel your humanity in order to trust your authority. Vulnerability doesn't just replace your expertise, it starts to ground it in a way that gives context to your convictions. It lets people understand that your clarity did not come from abstraction alone. It came from that living, from tension, from decisions, from having to become the woman who could hold what she now teaches. This is the part of what makes leadership super trustworthy. So when I talk about unapologetic visibility, I'm not talking about a louder internet presence. I am here to talk about it in a more integrated leadership way. I'm talking about that kind of visibility where your leadership is no longer split in half, where your intellect is not disconnected from your body, and where your strategy is not disconnected from your values. Unapologetic visibility is a personal one for me. Because if I look at my own evolution as a founder, as somebody who has had a very public presence, one of the biggest shifts that I've had to make is realizing that my own visibility was never just about me being on social media more. I had to really become more honest about what I'm actually here to embody, especially with the kind of leadership that I have and maintain and uphold. There have been seasons in my business where I thought the issue was my messaging and my articulation. And I thought if I could just continue to refine my message enough that the right people would finally understand the depth of what I do. And to some extent, your messaging and your positioning does matter. That is definitely something that I coach with all of my clients. But there came a point where I had to admit that part of what was happening was not just the messaging issue. And what it was I was still learning how to let the market encounter me at the level that I had already become as a leader. It was a very vulnerable threshold. Once you stop hiding behind better wording and better strategy, you are often left with a more confronting question. Am I actually willing to be seen in the full seriousness of my leadership? Especially when my work is intimate and extremely public. It's really important to note too that people are not just buying information from you. When they're working with you, they are buying access to your POV, your lens, your standards, the way that you make decisions, your voice, and your way of seeing what they cannot yet see for themselves. So for me in particular, my visibility is inseparable from trust, and trust is inseparable from congruence. I want to coach you for a few minutes. If your visibility has felt complicated lately, I want you to stop asking yourself whether you need a better social media strategy and ask yourself something much more revealing. Where have I been making myself easier to receive at the expense of being more accurately known? For many women, that is where the leak is. The deeper work is not always, how do I become more visible? But it's often, can I trust myself enough to let my full leadership be seen without immediately trying to manage the emotional aftermath of how it lands? That is a different level of maturity and the kind of visibility that I care about. And that is the kind of work that I do in one-on-one private coaching. If you are in a season where your leadership has outgrown the way you have been showing up, if your visibility no longer reflects the level of authority, nuance, and depth you know you actually hold, private coaching is where we do that work. This is where we dive in and really get a bird's eye view of how you're being perceived, where you are still editing, where your positioning is lagging behind your actual authority, and where your visibility is fragmented. At this level, you don't need just more generic advice. What you really need is a deeper alignment between who you are, how you lead, how the market encounters you, and a strategic partner that can uphold you to that account. So if this episode has been sitting in your chest for a little bit, if you have been listening and quietly thinking, I think she's talking about me, I want to invite you to apply to my private coaching program, which the links are in the show notes below. And I will leave you with this. Your next level of visibility is probably not asking you to become more visible online. It is really, really asking you to think about the type of leadership that you want to visibly exude. If you resonated with this episode, here's what I want you to do next. Subscribe and leave a review because that helps this podcast reach more women like us, women who are never meant to stay hidden, women who are meant to be highly visible leaders. Share this episode with someone you love who is really thinking about what their visibility means to them in the leadership that they are trying to uphold. And DM me on Instagram at the Social Butterfly Gal. Tell me your biggest reframe or your biggest breakthrough from today's conversation. If you're feeling the call to go deeper, to recalibrate your personal brand, leadership, and your visibility, I would love to support you through one-on-one coaching. You can find the coaching information and offers and the links in the show notes below, or send me a DM with the word coaching, and I will personally walk you through what offers are in alignment with your current season and what it looks like to step into this next era with clarity, confidence, and unapologetic authority. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening and for all of the shares and reviews. Remember this, you didn't come this far to play safe. You came here to be unapologetically visible. I'll see you next week.